We'll do a review in Likutei Sichos in Chelik Choftes, volume 29. This is the first Sicha for Devarim. The Rebbe actually explains here not a Rashi, but a Pasuk. The Rebbe doesn't address here why Rashi doesn't explain it, which the Rebbe would usually uh, ask when he learns the Chumash. But here, the Rebbe just wants to understand what is the meaning of Kirya. The word Kirya is mentioned in the Parshat Devarim. It's mentioned a few times. It's also in other places. But over here, what is, in this context, what does it mean, Kirya versus Ir? Ir is a city, and then there's a Kirya. And the Rebbe brings down different explanation. Eventually, the Rebbe explains from the way we find the idea of Kirya by Ore Miklot that the Kirya means a city where there is a togetherness, where there is a unity. And the Rebbe explains how that is connected to the Ore Miklot, that there has some spiritual uh, that it has some spiritual significance, and that means that there is strength there. So, in this context, that the Rebbe will explain, not only were they able to conquer cities, but also those cities that had that unifying strength, the spiritual strength, that too was giving to them. We're learning the Sicha in memory of Harav Levi Yitzchok ben Rabbi Chaim Tzvi, to benefit his soul, to hein nishmosei tzrura b'tzrei rachayim. And we go step by step. Aleph. B'parshaseinu, when the Torah is metair, vim hot kovish given sichen va'artzoi. In our parsha, when the Torah describes how they conquered Sichon and his land, that's the first. The Torah talks about how Sichon and then Oig. So first by Sichon it says, state in Pasuk, it states in the verse, "Vanil koid es kol orov ba'eis hahi," and we conquered all of his city during that time. Vanachrem, and we totally destroyed as kol ir, all the cities from Misim is men, Vanoshim women, Vatav goimer, total destruction. Goimer. And then the pasuk says, "Lo yehoiso kirya." Asher Sagva Mimenu. There was not a Kirya that was out of reach for us. We conquered everything, even the Kirya. So first it says we destroyed Ir of the people there, the Mesim, Anoshim, Bataf, men, the women, and the children. And then also on top of that, there was no Kirya that was beyond us, that we got that as well. So, what is this kirya that Rebbe is going to want to know? And similarly, a little bit later, al derech zeh steht euch by dem kibush von Eretz Oig. Similarly, it also written when they conquered the land of Oig. It says, Lo so kirya asher lo lokachnu meitom. There was not a kirya that we hadn't taken from them. So also the mention of kirya. So, what is this kirya? Now, one can argue that ir and kirya would be the same thing. It's just that in a beautiful way, yofi hamelitza, an elegant expression. So we use different words. We use first ir and kirya, but the Rebbe is going to negate that pshat. From Pashtus Loshen HaKosuf, from the simple language of the verse, Loihoiso Kirya. So the Torah says there was not a Kirya, Choch Frier State, Vanilked Es Kol Orov, that we conquered all of the cities. So we're already talking about the cities. And then the pasuk says, no, and there wasn't even a kirya. Is mashma, it appears as kirya meint nit das selbe v'ir. That doesn't mean the same as cities, just another name. Because the Torah says there wasn't even a kirya, meaning that looks like on top of the fact that we conquered the city, there wasn't even a kirya. It's not the same as the ir. Umezol zogen, as Torah is mishane, von ir zu kirya liyefa melitza. So that you should say, the Torah just changes. Kirya means the same thing as another word for ir, for city. And the Torah changed it from ir to kirya just because that's now a nicer way of expression to say it in a different word for the same meaning. But the Rebbe says, no, first the Torah says, Nilka is called Orav. And then we add to that, Lohoiso Kirya. There was not a Kirya, which means, seems to say that this is an addition to the Orav. Nor this is an under sug nitanir. It indicates that the Kirya is a different category. It's not a city. Und das ist der Pasuk Moisef. This is what the Pasuk adds. Loi hoiso afilu kirya, which means there wasn't even the kirya. We already talked about that we conquered these cities, but there wasn't even a kirya. Asher sogva mimenu, that was beyond our reach. Asher loy lokachnu meitom, what we didn't take from them, which means nit nor hotmen koivish given the orim. Not only did they conquer the cities, nor euch the kiryas, also the kiryas, whatever the kiryas. So what is the kiryas over here? In was besteht der Shinui zwischen kirya and ir? So what is the difference? What consists? What makes the difference between a kirya and a city? What is the ribusa? And then, first of all, what's the difference? And what is the novelty and saying? As euch die Kiryas hat man eingenommen. That also the Kiryas, they conquered not only the cities. So, first the Rebbe brings down from the Meforshim that a Kirya perhaps means, they explain, a city which is a fortified city that has walls around it, whereas a regular city would mean an open city without walls. And that explains that not only did we take the open cities, but we also took the fortified cities. But the Rebbe will explain that this is difficult to really accept. There are commentators, was lernen, that learn, as the ribusa from kirya if ir is, that what is the novelty that we also conquered the kirya on top of the cities that we conquered is, as kirya is an ir mukefes chaymer, that kirya means a city which is surrounded by a wall. Mashenkein ir, as opposed to when we say ir, a city, meant an ir process, that means an open city without a wall. And then, as we see with the Posik Zok gleich noch dem, the Posik says immediately following, and this is already by the second time when we're talking about Eretz Oig. So the Posik says, Lo hoiso kirya goimer, there was no kirya. And then the Posik follows, Shishim ir, 60 cities, Kol eile orim betzuris, these cities were fortified. Betzuris choyma, they were fortified with a wall. Gavoya, with a high wall, fortified with a high wall. Levad, besides me'orei haprozi, besides the open cities, these were fortified cities. So the pasuk seems to imply that the kirya is the fortified cities in addition to the open cities. And the meaning would be in the Pasukim are, Und der Chiddush in the Psukim is, and the novelty in these verses is, as nicht bloß die Orei HaProzis hat man eingenommen, not only did they conquer the open cities, not euch the Kiryos, but also the Kiryos, these cities which are the Orim HaMukofes Chaima, the cities that are surrounded by walls, the more fortified cities, Velchazayin and Asach Mer Bashitz, they are a lot more protected, even though they conquered them as well. So basically, we're going to say that the difference between Kirya and a city is fortified or not. But the Rebbe argues that because this comes in a separate pasuk by Milchemes Oig, by the second time, it's the second pasuk. That means that it's not the interpretation of the Kirya that we read in the previous pasuk. On the contrary, it's Pum Fakir. The first Min Kirya means something else. And here the pasuk is talking about open and closed cities. Besides the fact that by Mesich Oig, by the first time, it doesn't even mention the Prozi, the Betsuris. And Ober Kadaikis Shapin, if you took a good look, you look well, is the Funarai Leipech. So from this, it's actually evidence to the contrary, that Kirya does not mean the Betsuris Bashamayim, from them, or fortified city. From them, Gufa was the Torah is Moisif, Odem Chiluk, the fact that the Torah adds now this new distinction of the cities they conquered. Zwischen Orim Betzuris Chaimer Goimer and Orei Prozi, between cities that are fortified with a wall and open cities. In a Bezunder Posik, in a separate Posik, is mashma, it appears, it's understood as those was a state in Friedrich Posik, that where it says in the previous Posik, der Shinu zwischen Ir und Kirya, which there's a difference between city and a Kirya, meint das an ander Chiddush. That means a separate novel in Kirya legabe Ir. That's a separate thing, but Kirya is more than a city. Not the distinction because this is fortified and this is open, because in the previous pasuk, it doesn't, that's a separate distinction over there. Not only did they conquer cities, but also Kiryas. Not only did they conquer fortified city, open city, but also fortified city, but not that it's the same thing. Ubefrat, as the Shinui von Ir und Kirya, this change that there is an Ir and a Kirya, Zokshin the Torah by Milchemes Sichos Shalifnez. The Torah already mentions this. When the Torah talks about the war of Sichon, before this pasuk where there is this distinction between the Torah makes Orei Prozis and Betzuris, over there the already Torah calls it Kirya. Und dorten wird nicht der Mond, der Chiluk, over there's no mention of the difference from Orei Betzuris Chayim. If this is an explanation of Kirya, the Torah would have said it there by the first time when it talks about Sichon. Over there's no mention from the Orim Betzuris Chaimer un Orei Haprozi. So this all tells us that when it says here, Kirya, it's something else. It's not Ir, it's a Kirya. What is it? That's what we're trying to figure out. But we can't accept the interpretation that a Kirya is a fortified city, as some Mefarshim want to say, because there's no mention over here also, and it's not mashma in the pasuk further by Mechemes Oig, that this is the same as Kirya and Ir, is fortified or not. So what is Kirya? The Rebbe further says that Ulahoir, as by Mechemes Sichon zog der pasuk blois, just to point out that by Mechemes Sichon the pasuk only says Lahoisa Kirya Goimer. Die Rebusse von einnehmen die Kiryas und nicht die Rebusse haben eingenommen Orim Betzuris Chayma. Over there, the Torah doesn't mention at all. The Rebbe says the idea that they conquered cities that were fortified with a wall. The Rebbe just wants apparently to point out uh, this would, in a way, tell us that maybe Kiryat does mean the fortified city because that there's no mention of Torah about fortified city when we're talking about what they conquered by the war of Sichon. And the first time, there's no mention. And the Rebbe says probably Choch euch be'eretz Sichon seine mistam given orim mukafes chayma. Probably there must have been cities that had walls too. We can't say the Torah doesn't mention it. Maybe there was no walled cities in Sichon. The Rebbe says probably that there was. So we need to really understand why the Torah does not mention specifically as the Torah does by the Mechames Oig that there were also the Orim Betzuris. Over here we don't mention it. But yet that's not going to change the discussion over here about Kirya. Kirya does not mean Betzuris Bashamayim, and there is no indication for that from the Pasuk later on, as the Rebbe says. On the contrary, over there it's mashma that it's not Betzuris, it's in a separate Pasuk, it's mashma, it's something else. So what is a Kirya? So in Ois Beis, so first the Rebbe uh, questions what is Kirya, and it doesn't accept the explanation that it means a fortified city versus an Ir, which is an open city, and the Rebbe is left with the issue: what is a city? What is a fortified city? In the Seder Hadoros, the Rebbe brings down in the language, he says an Ir means a fortified city that means a city with inhabitants or with many inhabitants. The difference between a ir and a kirya is larger and has more people. Area, the difference between uh, ir and a kirya is that the uh, kirya is settled with many people. A ir can be not so settled, not in such a large population over there. Or a city can be without people. It's still a city, but a kirya means where there's people, as he brings a pasuk. But the Rebbe says in our pasuk, it says by the city before kirya that it was full with people, that you destroyed all the men, women, and children. So how could we say that here doesn't mean people? There must be something else. Base. The Baal Seder Hadoros, the author of Seder Hadoros, Besifrei Erke Akinuyim, he wrote this sefer also. The Erke Akinuyim, he describes, or it's kind of an encyclopedia for the descriptions, the value of the different description of meaning. It's like almost like a dictionary. Teach them chiluk zwischen ir und kirya. He translates the difference between a city and a kirya. Ir nikra af she'en bahem oich lesin v'diyodim. A city is called even if it doesn't contain inhabitants, people living there. Aval kirya hu al shem sheyesh bo b'nei odom. A kirya is named because there's people there. Kamoi, like we find, this is a pasuk in Malachim Allah. Over there it says, Ma koila kirya haima. What is the sound of this kirya, which is haima, which is a lot of noise coming from the kirya? That means it represents a large population. And then he further explains this. So based on this explanation, the Seder HaDoros, Baal Seder HaDoros explains the language by Ore Miklot. By Ore Miklot, over there we use the language, the Torah says, Vihikreisem lochem orim. So basically, you should make the orim into kreisem, in Kiryas. You should make those cities of refuge. You should make them Kiryas, Vihikreisem lochem orim. So he says, Ki ha'orim tasu oisom kirya. Those cities of refuge, make him into a kirya, to a large city. Harambam. And this fits with what the Rambam says, that Ori Miklot Ein Meshivin Oisom Elo B'Mokim Oichlusim, that the Ori Miklot, you only set them up, the Ori Miklot, you have to set them up in a place where there is people, so many people. And then it says, Nismatu Oichlusim, if it has had a diminishing of people left, there's not people there in the city, Moisifit. Then you add the nismat to the yorim, if people living there have been diminished, machnisim letoichem kahanim levim Yisraelim, you bring in there the kahanim, the levim, and the Yisraelim. You bring in there. There are various different versions here, and different, but this is basically a quote, not exact, from the Baal Seder Hadoros, that from the Rambam. So basically, you need the cities to be kreisi lochem orim. You want to make the cities into kiryas. So in our pasuk, by us, it says first that there was benachrim kol ir, and then kirya. But the Torah says beferish benachrim kol ir. How could we say if ir doesn't mean inhabited place, just a city, and Kirya means a city? Darf man aber verstehen, haben wir in die Psukim shebe Parsha Seinu is klar, in the verses in our Parsha, it's very clear, as euch die Orim haben gehad die Yodim, that also the cities had inhabitants. Wie steht, the Pasuk says, first it says, before Kirya, it says, Vanil koid es kol orov be'esahi, and we conquered all the city. Vanachrem es kol ir, and we destroyed the city from Misim, Vanoshim, Va'ata, from the men, women, and children. So these are inhabitants. Now the Pasuk says later on, Hachrem es kol ir Misim, Vanoshim, Va'ata, go ahead and destroy the Moshe accounting. Again it says, the cities, destroy them from men, women, and children. So Darfman Zogun, so we need to say, therefore they also have people, as in them inyan gufa b'negeya l'diyorim, that in this itself, they both actually have inhabitants, but as far as inhabitants, is do a chidush in kirya l'gabe ir, there is a novelty in a kirya relative to an ir. It's not like, only like the Seder HaDorah says, that the city has no inhabitants, because we see in our parsha it does have inhabitants. But there is a difference between the inhabitants, the way they inhabit a city, an ir, and the way the inhabitants inhabit a kirya, which is what the chiddush over here is, that not only did they conquer the ir, but they also conquer the kirya. So the Rebbe first explains, now understand it from this fact that we inhabit we make the Ore Miklot into a kiryo. And once we explain that, what's the purpose of making the Ore Miklot into a kiryo, we'll understand that this is to create a level of unity in the city, which is while the city of refuge serves a refuge for the person who has committed an accidental murder, and it provides a refuge for him. And once we'll understand that Kirya, we'll understand the Chiddush of the Pasuk over here, as the Rebbe will continue to develop this idea. Gimel. That man does verstehen will understand this Bahagdam Abir in dem Din by first explaining the halacha by Ore Miklot, by the cities of refuge. It says this Matu di Yureihem Machnisim Letoichom Kohanim Levim Yisraelim. That if the dwellers of the city of Ore Miklot have been diminished, you bring in into their Kohanim Levim Yisraelim. So what's the reason for that? From the timing was a state of them in Mefarshim. So what's the reason from the Mefarshim? The Rebbe is going to bring down a few reasons from the Mefarshim, but the Rebbe says there has to be another reason, but the Rebbe is going to explain an additional reason. The Rebbe is going to bring down now two reasonings why we might need Kohanim Levim Yisraelim, because since it's a city of accidental but murderers, it's a city of refuge. They may become a very strict and without compassion. So we need to bring in regular people. We need to bring in Jews that have compassion. That's one reason. That's one. That's the reason of the Ritva. From the timing was a state of them in the Farshim, from the reasons that Mefarshim say that we have to, explaining what the Gemara says, that you bring in, you fill in with these people, with the Kohanim, more Yidden, that Idva brings b'shem harameh, that Idva brings down in the name of the Rameh, as the far bringt men dort Kohanim Levim v'Yisraelim. The reason why we bring the Kohanim Levim v'Yisraelim is lefi sheyesh bahem midas hanove v'rachmonus v'lo yiyu shev chidam, because they have the character trait of humility, Yidden, Kohanim Levim Yisraelim, and they have the compassion. Soon we'll talk about why we need the other answers, why specifically Kohanim Levim Yisraelim, not just Jewish people, but we'll see in the other answer. But over here, let's bring in Yidden, because it says that it won't name of the Rameh, because they have the character trait of humility and compassion. And they won't be pouring blood, meaning they won't kill this accidental killer. They also won't present this murderer to the Redeemer of the blood that wishes to kill him. They won't give it to him. So we need to have their regular people who will be compassionate and humble. So, like them tam, according to this reasoning, we find a lot of reasonings, a lot of things about the cities of refuge, and this would align with all of the other reasons. This is like one reason amongst many other reasons why, what we have to do for the Ore Mikla to keep it a safe and a place in which the Redeemer of the blood can live. So then their tam, like them tam, is that doziker din. So this halacha, to fill it in with other people, with the Kohen Levim, is the doziker din al derech with the andere tenoim sheba'ari mikla. This is similar to the other conditions what the cities of refugees have to have in Gemara and Rambam Shom, as appear in the Gemara and the Rambam. And over there, for example, the Rebbe quotes the Ore Miklot ein Oisin Oisam Loi Ayoras Gedolos. We don't make him into large cities. And also Veloi Krochim Gedolim, we don't make them into large metropolis. And also Veloi Ketanim, we don't make them very small. Elo Ayoris Beinonis, Beinuniyos, but you just make them average cities. And same other condition, ve'ein Moishivin Oisum Ella B'Mokim Shvokim, and you don't place them only in a place where there is marketplaces, or B'Mokim Hamayim, and where there is water. This is meant vein main shamayim machnisim techamayim. If there is no water source there, you bring the water. That means these are all to benefit and make this a place conducive for living for the one who's finding refuge there. But those alles seinen seitige Tnoim in der Ir Miklot. These are all conditions, not uh, the main. These are side conditions in the Ir Miklot to live there to Elas from Goyla. This is to benefit the one who has exiled into these cities. So to benefit him and to protect him and to for his need, that's why we have all these different conditions. So this would be one of the reasons. It's not a fundamental necessity of the Arei Miklot. It's just an additional condition, a side part to make this place more livable for the one who is exiled into the city of refuge. The Rebbe is going to argue that because of the posik v'hikreisem lochem ir, it means seems like to be a more essential part of the Orei Miklot, not just additional comfort for him, as we will see in a minute. First, the Rebbe brings another reason. Nochatam state in Achrenim. There's another reason that brought down in the Achrenim. And over here, the law is that if a city gets this is from Tzofnas Paneach, that if a city uh, has more refugees from other who are murderers who came to the city, then the city loses the power of being a city of refuge. So that's why, if it has been diminished, the city has to add more inhabitants so it doesn't lose its status of a city of refuge. Nochatam steht in Achrenim. Another reason stated in Achrenim. Es kann sein, as in der Ir Miklot soll nisrabe werden asach goyim sherotzchu. It's possible that in this city of refuge, there would be increased many exiled that have committed murder. That's where they be exiled. Und die Ir soll mehr nicht keule sein. And the city will not anymore serve as a place to absorb these accidental murderers. Varum, because the halacha is, as we know, in the Gemara Makis over there, it says that a ir sharuba reitzchem ena koletas. If a city is majority of murderers, it will no longer be absorbing the other people. The Liber bringt man dort rein, Kohanim Levim v'Yisraelim. Therefore, we bring in there the Kohanim Levim v'Yisraelim to werden Toshvei Ha'ir, to become inhabitants of the city. Bichdei ze sollen sein der Reuv und nicht die Goyim. So they should be the majority, the ordinary people, but not those who exiled there. They shouldn't take over, become the majority. Lifiza. So according to this, explanation, Taka, it's more than the Ritva in the name of the Rameh, who gave us a side reason. Here, the need for having the people settle there is in order for it to preserve it as a city of Miklat. Lefizes the din nitkein tonight dodi. It's not a condition on the side in Ir Miklot, nor does is negeya to their kalita gufa, but this is important to be able to absorb itself. But yet, this is really not that makes up the Arei Miklot, but it's to prevent it from not being able to function as an Arei Miklot. The Rebbe's argument is that the Pasuk V'ikreisim lachem, you make the city into a kirya, is part of what makes it an Arei Miklot, and not only not to uh, take away from something which would make it no longer Miklot. Lefizeh is that din nit came tonight's dodi near Miklot. It's not a side condition in a city of refuge. No, dosis negeya to their klita gufa. But that is tak important, or else you cannot be curled. Afal pikein is as not a tanai shlili, but still, this is only a condition that we need to make it and fill it with people so that it shouldn't stop functioning as an Ore Miklot. It's not that this makes it into an Ore Miklot, but it's to take away the possibility of on making it an Ore Miklot. Mizder mit shoyle lumevatel dem chashash, but we negate and we take away the worry as the Irzol Zayin Ruba Rotzchim, that the city will become majority of Rotzchim and they won't be able to serve. That's the purpose, according to this explanation, why we have to put in people, in there more people. Darfun aber was der Baal Sefer Hadoides, verbind dem din mitten Posig. The fact that the Baal Seder Hadari, he ties it with the Fasik, Vihi Kreisim Lochem Orim, Ore Mikla Tiyanu Lochem. In the Pasuk, he says, I will make for you cities of Kiryas, and they should be cities of refuge, Lochem, Venos Shama Reitseach, and over there a murder will run, Makin Nefesh Bishgoga, one who kills somebody accidentally. Der Pasuk was werd gesagt dem etzem din wegen Ore Miklot. He ties it to the pasuk in which we tell you about the halacha itself about Ore Miklot. We're telling you how Ore Miklot is made up, is mashma, as esis adin in them etzem chalois din Ore Miklot. That this is a halacha how the cities of refuge law takes place, this haste, which means nit belois is das nit kein tnight study. Not only is this not a side condition, vi de toishve ha'ir. So both things we're negating now. Negating the pshat of the ritva, and we're also negating the pshat of the tzofnas paneach. That means like this, that the pasuk here tells us how we make up an Ore Miklot. So that means, nit belois is das nit kent night study. Not only is this adding these adding the Yidden into the city, just a side condition, so how the inhabitants should conduct themselves with the refugee, that they'll be with compassion, they will be with humility. So not only that, nor says oich nita din shlili, but there's more. It's not even a negating the having these people there to negate the worries of the tzavnas paneach, to mevatel zayin chashash, to negate the worry from Yisrael hagolim. So to take away from that, so that would be the reason. No, b'meilas the irvet that can occur, so the city will no longer be able to calculate. It's more than that. Not only that. Notice this, but rather this is a positive aspect. Quoting the pasuk is means that this accomplishes tut oif the klita von der miklot. So this makes it into a city that can accept these refugees, make it a place of that it came up is because it's a kirya. So there's something more than just what the Ritva says or the Tzofnas Paneach says. Something about the kirya makes up the calculation and makes it up more than just the reasoning of the Ritva and the Tzofnas Paneach, which don't address the essence of making it into a kirya, makes it into an orei miklot. And the Rebbe says further, noch mer is das muchach maloshen haposik. So this is from the Seder Hadoros, the way he quotes it, but in the posik itself, v'hikreisem lachem orim. It says, make the orim into kiryas. Und der noch, I will make this orim to kirya. And the noch steht, orei miklot tiyan lachem. From them is moving, from this we understand, as der inyan von ki ha'orim tasu oisom kirya, that the cities you make into a kirya, according to Seder HaDoros, is negates them etzem inyan von ir. That is negeya to the main part of the city. That's making it into that city of refuge. And Davke Damos is chal if him der din for ir miklot, and only then rest upon them the law of ir miklot. That's what it accomplishes when you make the ir into a kirya or a miklot to yenolachem. That's when it can be an or a miklot. That's what you read the pasuk. Hikreis lachem orim, and then it'll become or a miklot to yenolachem. Darf man verstehen. So what we're trying to understand here, dem inyan from the kreisi ha'orim, the kreisim ha'orim taso isim kirya. Why is this difference, the kreisim, to make them into a kirya from the andere tnoim v'gedorim was in ihre miklot, than the other conditions and definitions that are in Orei Miklot? Here we're saying this is actually in the pasuk to make it with these people, to bring them into the city. That is what accomplishes Orei Miklot. Why is that accomplish Orei Miklot more than some of the other things that need to take place in Orei Miklot? Over there, they're either side conditions or they prevent from the Orei Miklot to stop functioning Orei Miklot. But here we're saying what makes up the Orei Miklot is dafke through the fact that we add in these people. So the Rebbe will explain now that the cities of refuge serve as a city of refuge is more than just being in that city, but he becomes a part of this city, and he has the protection of the entire city. And that protection and being part of the city is only when it's full with inhabitants that they are together. Let's see how the Rebbe explains this. Dalit. So we can say the explanation there, dos was ore miklot seinen koilet, dem heurig nefesh, the fact that they absorb the one who killed someone, and the din is when der goyel adam torim dorten nit hargenen, and the redeemer of the blood, the relative of the one killed, the one murdered, is not allowed to kill the redeemer of the blood, kill the murderer. Is das nicht nur mit Saddam, was gefindt sich in der Tchume von der bestimmter Ir. It's not just because he finds himself within the boundaries of a certain city, but thus is making of him, which protects him because he's in that city. It's not just that. But das ist verbunden und shaykh zu dem heiligen Nefesh Kufa. But this actually is tied to the person who killed. Being in that city is not just some external matter. You're in a city, so therefore you're protected, but it's being that city is tied to the murderer zone. B'shas kumt rein in them ir, when he enters into the city. Werter artel von dem Zibur v'haklal von dem ir. Then he becomes a part from the community and the generality of the city. Ubemela hoter di hagone von dem Sichos hatzibur shel ir zu. And therefore, he has the protection and the merit, the protection and merit from the community of this city. Being in that city makes you part of that city, and it makes you part of that community, and you get the community protection as a whole. Wenn rechnet man die ganze Stadt mit alle Tishovim shebo al sakol v'tzibur echad. When can we consider and count the entire city with all of its inhabitants as a community and one tzibur and one quorum? When das is be'ofen shel kirya, when there is a level of kirya, that kirya creates that sense of that tzibur, that sense of a quorum. B'shas, the shtot is moli, when the city is full. Miyushav kulei, either it's entirely settled, or yakolpan merubei. Minimally, it has to be majority when it's settled, at least majority. Mid di yodim, with inhabitants. Was leben dort be'ofen shel kviyas. They live there in a permanent way. Nit bakroi, they're not just temporary there. Boyfriend arai, not just happen to be there on a temporary basis. Only if they live there permanently. B'shas obers is this might givoren di yureim. What happens when the inhabitants have been diminished and we don't have a majority of people living there? Is bottle limits for the Yeshua Ir al Sibur Echad. So then the entity that we have, cities, inhabitants of the cities, is just one community, it's one Sibur, one quorum has dissipated, is gone, is bottled. She's not Kama Yechidim was Lebanon in name Mokum. It has looked like many individuals that live in one city. You don't have it mostly inhabited. It is lacking that, so it's no longer a one community, one tzibur. It's a bunch of individuals. This haste. The ala protim, the other details that we say about the Ore Miklat, and meshivin oisum elo b'mokim ochlisim, that we can only settle them in a place where there is lots of people. And nismatim ochliseim esifim aleim. If the people have been diminished, you add to them nismatu the yureim. If the inhabitants, the dwellings of kamachnisn l'toichem kohen levim v'Yisraelim, that you add there the kind of zayne tnoim or gedorim. So this are actually conditions, and they define. These are defined. The ir is nit stam ashtot. They make up that this city is not just a city was Lebanon asach yichidim zusammen, where many individuals just happen to live together. Nor zivert anir achas v'oslepta tzibur mesuyim, but that makes it into one city in which a specific community, a tzibur, lives. That is important to the Ore Mikla, to have a place of a tzibur, not a place where a lot of individuals. What makes it a place of a tzibur is that there is uchlesin, and you memayed, you bring in the Kohanim Levim Yisrael. So what is so special that we require from all categories, Kohanim Levim Yisrael? Why not just say, make it into people, make it into a tzibur? Why does the Gemara say that we're going to have the Kohanim, Levim, and Yisraelim? So Yesh Loimar, because we're trying, the Rebbe will explain, to create that tzibur protection for the Goyal Hadam, and he had sort of caused a blemish in the Jewish people as a whole by murdering a person. Therefore, we need to make it up by bringing all people. Let's look inside. Yesh Loimar. Das is euch der Tam. You can say this is also the reason. Was machnisim letoicham kohanim levim Yisraelim. We bring in all the three categories. Mefarshim fragen the kasha. Mefarshim asks the question: Favos darf men machni sein alle drei? Why is it necessary to bring in all three? Rapi analyzes this movement. Based on the above, we understand it. Why we need all three. The Hagonas uklitas hatzibur was der heurig nefesh bishgoga darf haben. The protection and the absorption of the community that the one who killed accidentally requires is nicht nur soll sein a Telefon. It's not just to be part of, soll sein zusammen mit der Kvutziden, just to be together with a group of Yidden, nor sizat tzibur mein Klal Yisrael, but it needs to be in such a group which represents Klal Yisrael. We want the Goyal Hadam, in order to be effective and in order for him protection, he needs to be in a general community which the Jewish community is made up of, which is Kohanim Levim Yisraelim. Similar, undos wird aufgetan. How do we accomplish that? Durch them, through this, was machnisim letoicham, that we bring into the Ore Miklat als Teishavim Kvuim, as permanent residents, Allah Sugim from Klal Yisrael. All the categories of the Jewish people, which is Kohanim Levim Yisraelim, Kohanim Levim Yisraelim. That's why we need a full representation of the Jewish community for the Goyal Hadam to be becoming part of that community. Why is that a requirement? Der Tam der Fun is movement, it's understood. Midem was horak nefesh mi Yisrael. When you killed a soul of Israel, you killed a person, a Jewish person, was alle Eden seinen Goy echad. All Yidden are one nation. Ein klal, ein mitzias, one rule, one entity. Hat angerirrt Klal Yisrael. You touched all of Israel. By one Yid who was part of all of Yidden, you had made an impact. You touched all of Yidden. Ubemele hat der heurig nefesh sich mafrid given from Klal. And therefore the person who killed the soul, he separated himself from the general community. Unochmer, not only did he separate it, is bestir of an ilchaba, he is in conflict, contradiction, and he's at war with the community by killing somebody from that community. Und der Liber is sein Hagona, and therefore his protection. We can even say, add to it, that even his atonement depends on durch dem was wird a Teil from Klal Yisrael, by becoming back part of the Klal Yisrael, durch sein in dem Ore Miklat, by being in the city of refuge, being part of the Klal Yisrael. And part of Klal Yisrael is represented by Kohanim Levim Yisraelim. That's why the specific requirement that we read over there says that you bring in Kohanim Levim Yisraelim, because that is the way to bring you back into the community which you basically tore yourself away and you waged war, you fought against it by killing someone. And to bring you back, you need a full community. You need Kohanim Levim Yisraelim. And that's the reason why that's an essential part of the city of refuge, is to make it into a kiryah, to making sure that there is more inhabitants and permanent inhabitants of the Kohanim, Levim, Israeli, because that is essentially what gives you the power to the city, the power to bring protection and even atonement for the person who killed accidentally. And the Rebbe now is going to continue explaining that just like we talk about in the simple context of city of refuge protecting you, there's also the Ore Miklat, and these ideas of Ore Miklat presented here in the simple pshat also against uh, Satan, the Satan who is also trying to uh, get a yid who accidentally does an avera, or when a yid kills accidentally, and the Satan wants to punish him, and he is the Goyel Hadam. Literally, we learned the Goyel Hadam is the relative from the one who was murdered. But the Goyel Hadam also refers to the Satan. And we will see how all this lesson and the necessity of being part of Klal Yisrael protects from the Goyel Hadam, as we'll see in Oisei. Hey, I state in Svarim, it states in the Svarim that as the Goyel Hadam is Eich Merames Eifun Satan, that the Redeemer of the blood also hints to the Satan. He looks to criticize, to find criticism against a Jew. Yid is Heirig Nefesh Bishgogo. When a Yid kills someone accidentally. Zuch der Goyel Hadam imainish sein. The Redeemer of the blood, the Satan, looks to punish him for shvichas domim, for pouring blood, for sein chet, for his sin. Und teure gid de Hagone von die Ore Miklat. And Torah provides for the protection of the cities of refuge. For Ir Miklat, city bed. Kidua, as it's known, is that in from Golus Ir Miklat, the idea of exiling into the city of refuge, akapore faran herig nefesh bishgogo. It's an atonement for the one who killed. It's not just a protection for him, but it's actually an atonement for herig nefesh bishgogo. Aber die kapora werd nigmar. When is it completed? This atonement. Erst laachre ves endigt sich der Zman was darf sein in or ir miklot. After the time that he needs to spend in the city of refuge, that is when the atonement is complete. Ikro shel mikro. So the Rebbe says like this: the main purpose of the city of refuge, kipshute shel mikro, as the simple meaning of the pasuk, is aber der inyan ha'agone, that it is for protection, to protect the person. Sai bepashtus, both simply on the literal level, zu verhitnim von dem Goyel Hadam, to protect him from the redeemer of the blood, pen yirdev kiyechem levava, he might chase him because his heart would be boiling with revenge for the murder. Und euch far dem ruchnis dikum Goyel Hadam, and also as a protection for the spiritual redeemer of the blood. It's mainly protection, not so much atonement, but to protect from physically and from the spiritual redeemer, from the Satan. As euch eider der Id bakum sein kapora. So that is that even before the Yid receives his atonement, durchgolus through the exile, Ubemele is noch bei ihm dort die Tetzo Pule von sein Chet, and therefore, because he hasn't yet completely been forgiven, there is still the consequence, the results, and the act of his sin. is al yidei zeh. How is he protected? Was gefindt sich in ihre miklot by finding himself in the city of refuge, while he still has that blemish on him, hasn't been forgiven. How is he protected by being in the city of refuge? Ken der goyel hadamim nit honor, and the redeemer of the blood cannot touch him. Der koyach hagone von ihre miklot nimmt sich davon, that power for protection, of protection from a city of refuge, comes from the fact was is a kiryo, an ort von Achdus Kenal. It's a place of unity, as mentioned before. Ki Yedu, as it's known, as Bishazmi is in a matzah from Sholem va'Achdus. When you're in a situation of peace and unity, is dos ha'atzola va'agona, that is a protection, a savior and a protection. K'maimer Chazal, as our sages of blessed memory say, as afilu oivda avodah zorah, even those who worship idols, oives is faran zwischen ze sholom va'achdus, if amongst them is peace and unity, kavayochol ein hasoten negebem, so to speak, the Satan cannot touch them. Ein midas hadin nagaz mehem. This is in Tanchuma, in Sifri, different language. Over there is the measure of judgment cannot touch them if there is unity and peace. Shenemar, because the pasuk in Hosea says, Chibur atzabim, Ephraim hanachloi. Even though there is a connection, a chibur of atzabim. Atzabim is avodah zorah. They worship avodah zorah. Ephraim. So that connection, hanachloi, let him go, because of that level of unity, that level of chibur. Even though they're atzabim, hanachloi. Nit kukun dekoy von shval hamatzav beyoser. Notwithstanding, on the very low level, they're the level of Oivda v'Dezorah, they worship idols, is aber der inyan von Achdus Sholem, but that idea of unity, peace, Megin, it protects, Amizolzen, it can order that you cannot touch them. Bis, to the extent, as Omar Hamokim Kaviyochel, and Yochel Lishlik Bahem, it's the Loshen and Bereshis Rabbah, that the Eberster says, so to speak, I cannot dominate over them because they are in peace, so the Eberster cannot do anything about it to punish them. Similar is in our halacha, as Euch Eider the Heilig Nefesh hat sein Kapora. Even before he has his atonement, is the Achdus von Ir Miklot of Ir Megin. That unity of the city of refuge protects him. The protection for the Heilig Nefesh Bishgoga, for the accidental murderer, comes even while he has still that stain, he has that sin, he has not been atoned, but that level of unity that exists in the Kirya is what protects him. But when I verstehe dem Loschen Kirya, was steht bei Milcham Sichos v'Oig, will also understand the language of Kirya by the war of Sichos v'Oig. Wie gesagt, weiß der Inyan von Ribui die Jurim von der Kirya in der selber Kirya, the multiple dwellings in a Kirya, in the same Kirya. What does that represent? If der Achdus from the Toshvei Ha'ir, that represents the unity of the inhabitants, those who live in the city. Und das sagt der Pasuk. And this is what the Pasuk is saying. By Sichos v'Oig is given nit nor gashmi zikr toikev. Not only did they have physical strength, b'midachi gedola, on the greatest measure, no nochmer, by is given der inyan from Achdus, they had the idea of unity. Zeire Shtet seinen given kiryos. They were cities of kiryos, was dosis an inyan oich shel hagone ruchnius, which means they also had spiritual protection. They had kiryos, and still we were able to conquer them. We also find this. One can argue maybe this all should apply, this level of unity, later on, but after the Torah. But we find this by Bnei Noach. There steht der Tam for was der Chibur Atzab Ephraim is a posik by Ephraim, by the Bnei Yisrael, but here we find it also by Bnei Noach the Rebbe brings. Versteht der Tam, Pravos der Deur Loge is never given. As the reason is stated, how come the generation of the Hafloga, of the separation, is not been destroyed, uh, is while the Deur Hamabel, the Eibishter separate them, made them separate, but they were uh, initially they were together, as we said, they came together, but the Mabul did a Mabul, they were fighting each other, killing each other, robbing from each other. So there was no unity. That's where they were destroyed. Why was the Deur HaFloga never given with the Deur HaMabul, like the generation of the flood? Well, the Deur HaFloga hoyunoigim avo v'reyus b'neim. They were in a friendly and loving way. Shenemar sofa achas dvarim achodim. It says they were just one tongue, one language, and same words because there was unity there. Masha'inkin Der Hamabul, as opposed to the Der Hamabul, was there was murder, they were stealers, theft, and they were fighting amongst themselves. So you see that even by Bnei Noach, the level of unity protected them from not getting lost by the Der Hafloga. So this is what the Torah is trying to tell us here. Those is the rebus of the Torah is madgish by milchames sicham ve'eg. And this is the novelty that the Torah expresses and emphasizes when we have the war of Sichon Oig. There wasn't even the Kirya that was beyond our reach. Or this language later on, there wasn't even a Kirya that we didn't take from them. As I feel the Shtet Velchazani given a Kirya, even the cities that were a Kirya, Bazei is given Achdus V'Sholem, which means there was unity and peace. And therefore they also had a spiritual protection. Yet the Yidden were able to win them, be victorious over them, and conquer them. Move on. So, according to this, it's understood. The Rebbe said before, it doesn't even mention the Betzuris by the war of Sichon. So the Rebbe says this is even a bigger chiddush than the level of Betzuris. Move on. As Kirya is aggressor chiddush afilu von orim Betzuris. That the fact that it says that we didn't even were able to reach even the Kirya, it's even greater than our Betzuris. Valdos is a hagone ruchnis. This is a spiritual protection by Sofa, and in addition, alun starker von hagones gashmius than physical protection. Und der Fahr, der Mond, der Posuk by Milchemes Sichen Blois. That's why the Torah, the verse by the war of Sichen, only mentioned Loiso Kirya, because that gives out the bigger chiddush. Und nicht Orim Betzurus Chaimer Kanal Seif Sif Aleph, as mentioned earlier, Seif Sif Aleph doesn't say anything about Betzurus Chaimer, because once it says Kirya, that already is a bigger chiddush, because besides the physical, this is a spiritual, that even the spiritual unity did not help them, and the Yidden were able to conquer that. So that's why, that's the meaning of Kirya, and that's why by Sichon it doesn't even have to say about the Oris B'tzuris B'shamayim, because if the Kiryas could not withstand them for sure, which is a spiritual protection for sure, the Orim B'tzuris would not protect them. But how is Taka? Why Taka so? How come if they were so protected because they were a Kirya, spiritually, how would they Yidden able to conquer them? Zion. The Tam Hadover was Yidden haben gekannt überkommen die Achdus von Sichen ve'oi. What's the reason why the Yidden were able to overcome that unity of Sichen and Oig? Afal Pivos Oig by Bnei Noach is Poelu Mechazik Uchulu Ian Agdu Vashom Kanal. even though that also by nations of the world, by Nenoach, it impacts and strengthens the idea of unity and shalom. And there's a key, there's how come we were able to conquer them. Is Valzeyer Ardus is Bloizachitzonizdike. Their unity is only an external one. Sie kommen sich zusammen, they get together, sagen sich mishtatev in ein Pula, and they participate in one act. So the connection is an external, an act. Sie ist nicht kein Achdus be'etzem. It's not a unity in essence. Was the Faris by Bnei Noach nitot together from Tzibur. That's why by Bnei Noach there doesn't exist the definition of a tzibur, of a community, warum afilu la'acharei v'zever nisachet. Even after they unite, bleibt jeder yochid ametzius protis. Each individual remains an individual uh, entity. Und der Riber b'shas Eden haben Milchome gehad gegen sie. So therefore, when the Yidden waged war against them, with their Yiddischer Achdus, with the Yiddish unity, the Achdus Amitis from Bnei Yisrael, the true unity of Bnei Yisrael, hat es mevatel gewend, the Hagona mitzad der Achdus Lumazeh. This negated that protection that comes from the unity of the other side, because the unity of the Yidden is stronger, because that's an essence unity versus only the external unity of the nations, and that's why the Yidden were able to conquer them. Um, so the Rebbe will now explain why does the Torah emphasize this idea that their unity, their kirya, couldn't stand in the way of the Yidden, but it doesn't find that we don't find it by the other wars, only by Sich and V'oig. And the Rebbe will explain that the Sich and V'oig were a preparation to the conquering of Eretz Yisrael, and that's why it was necessary to bring out that special level of unity of the Yidden that can conquer the Sich and V'oig. Let's look inside this. We still need to understand them. Tam, the reason was Dafki in them Kibush von Eretz Sich and V'oig, that it's only when we're conquering the land of Sich and V'oig is the Torah Madgish Odem Inyan. The Torah emphasizes this idea. There wasn't even a kirya that was beyond us, that we didn't take from them. Why is it only by this war of Sich and V'oig? And then we can say the explanation. The Kipush von Eretz Sich and V'oig, the conquering of the land of Sich and V'oig is given from Weg to, this was on the road to, und zu Lib, and because Koifer Zayin Eretz Yisrael, that was on the way, and because to conquer Eretz Yisrael. Nochmer, more than that, not only was it on the way, to a certain extent, it's considered the conquering of Eretz Yisrael. But Kama Perotim, in several details, Rechen sich Eretz Sich and V'oig, the land of Sich and V'oig is considered als Hascholaf and Kibush Eretz Yisrael, the beginning of the conquering of Eretz Yisrael. Bees, to the extent as Lakama Deis, that in many, according to several opinions, is das nichlal in the bris bein habesorim. That is also included in the covenant amongst the pieces which Hashem did with Abraham, which would include also the parts of Sichen ve'oig. So this is all on the way to Eretz Yisrael, all part of Eretz Yisrael. Einer von die Iker Chidushim was hat sich aufgetan bei Knesset Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael. One of the main novelties that has been accomplished with the Jews entering into Eretz Yisrael is bestanden in them. It consisted of in the fact was damals seinen Eden geworden am Metzies von Tzibur Beufel von Kol. The Jewish people became a community, a Tzibur, a quorum. In a way, they became a Kol. Was the Faris Damel Davken is Chayvu Ba'arvus. That's why then they became obligated in responsibility, that one Yid is responsible for the other. We became one Kol. Mashenkein in Babel, as opposed to in Babel when they're not in Eretz Yisrael, is nitoder gather ein tainis tzibur bebabel. Over there, there's no such a thing as a community fast in Babel because there's no real tzibur over there. It's only in Eretz Yisrael. This haze, b'knisosam la'eretz, when they entered into the land, is nigu mar gevorim b'shleimus. At that point, it was fully completed, the Metzias from Yidden, the entity of a Yidden. They became fully one. To use the language of the Tzopnas Paneach, Achar Shenichnasu Eretz Yisrael, after they entered Eretz Yisrael, Nasu Tzibur, Nasu Metzias Achas Nitzchis. After they entered Yisrael, they became a Tzibur, and they became one eternal entity. When that is Meirich Vidos is Negei Kamalachas, and he prolongs as this is touches into many halachas the fact that they became one Tzibur. So, but this completion and wholesomeness of the Yidden becoming part and one and responsible, everything in happened when they went into Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael completed all that. Und der Riber hat sich gefordert darf gegen Kibush Eretz Sichon ve'Oig. So therefore, specifically when they were conquering the land of Sichon ve'Oig, als Hagdoma v'Aschola von Kibush Eretz Yisrael, as an introduction and as the beginning of conquering of Eretz Yisrael, to mevatel sein dem Inyan HaKirya, from Sichon Oig, to negate, to destroy the concept of that Kirya, that unity from Sichon Oig, the Achdus in Klippa by Umas Oilom, the unity of Klippa by the nations of the world. Heit time Gufo hat Sichon Oig sich gestellt mit dem Koyach von Kirya, and for that reason itself, Sichon Oig, they placed themselves with the power of Kirya, aufhalten Eden from Kumen Eretz Yisrael. They wanted to use that level of strength to prevent Yidden from coming to Eretz Yisrael. Und euch der Koyach bei Eden, auf einem der Kiryos von Eretz Yisrael wie euch ist gewähnt, and how does the power of the by Yidden to be able to conquer this unity, this Kiryos of Eretz Yisrael is given mitzad dem Inyan Hagdus Gufa was because of this idea of the unity. But this is given Negeya. So this was able the Yidden to conquer their unities by the Yidden's unity, and that was necessary. That was Negeya in the Haschola from Kibush Eretz Yisrael Kula. This was important, the way to conquer all of Eretz Yisrael. It started with Sichon V'Oig. Ubemele is by Yidden Damot given. And therefore, by the Yidden, there was then main koyach hatzibur v'hakol sheberetz Yisrael. That's similar to the power of the tzibur and the kol, which is in Eretz Yisrael. If mevatel zayin und koiver zayin the kiryos, they had similar to that power of tzibur and the kol at the time as they're going into Eretz Yisrael for Eretz Yisrael. So they were able to negate and to conquer the kiryos, them tzibur shebel umazeh, the tzibur of the other side. So that's why over here there's the emphasis by the war of Sichon V'Oig, because it was necessary to get that unity by Yidden to conquer the unity of Sichon and Oig, because this is what Israel is all about, is that unity. And as a preparation, they use that unity in order to crush the unity of the Le'umazeh. Now the Rebbe is connecting it to the Parsha, to the Parshas Masei and Devarim, okay, but Matis also, but it is specifically connecting to Masei Udvarim. The Rebbe is connecting it now. Test Parshas Matis Masei Udvarim. Matis is always also read, but the Rebbe brings in a parenthesis because the Rebbe is explaining Masei Udvarim. But in gelenkt allemol in the tag from Bein HaMetzorim. They're always read during the days of Bein HaMetzorim between Shiva Asar B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av. Is moving at the Teuchen from Kirya, so it's understood that the content of the idea of Kirya, welches Mudgesh Sai in Parshas Masei, which is emphasized both in the section of Masei and Sai in Parshas Devarim, have Mashayches Miyuchedes to them Zman, have a special connection to the time of the Bein HaMetzorim. The Churban V'Golus von Eden is Sibosei the Pirut zwischen Eden. What is the destruction and the exile of the Jewish people? The reason is the separation amongst Eden. K'maimer Chazal, as the saying of our sages of blessed memory, as the Churban is gekumen b'tzadem oven for sinas chinom, that the destruction came because of the sin of senseless hatred. Because the Puna is moving, so from that we understand as der Tikkun from Bein HaMetzorim. How do we fix the Bein HaMetzorim, the correction? Is durch mevatel sein, the Sibus HaChurban, is by destroying and negating the cause for the destruction. Durch Moisiv sein und Mechazik sein dem Inyan von Kirya von Eden, by adding and strengthening the idea of Kirya, of unity by Eden. Ahavas Yisrael, love of their fellow, bizin an oifen von Achdus Yisrael b'shleimus, to the extent of unity of the Yidden in a wholesome way. Und in dem seine dort zwei Shlovim. So now we're reading Masei and Devarim. We're reading it in these two steps of negating this sinas chinom, the separation. In dem zwei Shlovim, wie man lernt das the Minyan in Parshas Masei, und dann noch in Parshas Devarim. First, in the Parshas Masei. In Masei, we talk about the Ore Miklat over there, to make them Kirya. And wieder noch in Parshas Devarim. And then we read it about the Machamas Sich and the Oig in the Parshas Devarim. L'choyle Reish sagt man, at the very beginning, we say, as Oig v'Yidin gefinnen sich noch in Golos, even as Yidin find himself in exile. In the Masei B'nai Yisrael, we're still in the journeys of the Yidin, in Midbar Ha'amim, in the nations of the desert of the nation, noch Eiders is do di kapora v'chatoenu, even prior for the atonement for our sin. Hot Mishen the Hagon and Neged them Goyel Hagon. We already have the protection against the Redeemer of the blood. So we don't have the kapara yet, like we're still in the Are Miklot. We still have the kapara against the Goyel Adam, durch the Hanhoge na Eifel from Kirya. If we conduct ourselves in the way, through our conduct in a way of Kirya, of unity, v'hikreisim lochem Orim, make the Orim into Kiryas. Eden stehen zusammen be'achdus, Eden standing together in unity. Und das ist der Hagdome, this is the introduction, was durch through it wird aufgetan der Bittel von Kirya del Umazah, that we negate the unity of the other side. The Kirya there was no Kirya that was above and that we didn't take from them. Biz the Bittel v'Kapore, till the negation and the atonement from Chataenu b'Shleimus, from our sins completely. So in Golus, we're still protected through unity. Eventually, we reach the level that we conquer it all, that we negate all of the negativity, as we read in Parshas Devarim. We immediately enter the good and wide land, Eretz Yisrael, to the extent Hashem, your God, will widen your territory. Nit nor Ever Hayardin, not only the other side of the Jordan, that was conquered before they conquered the land, on Kibush Haaretz, and before and the conquered the land, or but even what follows after the conquering of the land, the lands of Keni Kinizi v'Kadmoni, the Rambam zogt, Bebias Mashiach Tzidkenu Yovev Yigalenu, with the coming of a righteous Mashiach, let him come and redeem us, V'Lechenu Kamius Lartzenu, and lead us upright to our land, B'Meidu V'Meinu Mamish, very soon in our days. Sichos Shabbos Parshas Eikev. This is from the Sicha of the portion of Eikev, Shabbos Parshas Re'ei, in the year Tavshin Mem Aleph.